Welcome to the Assistant Room Podcast Season 2. We are the go-to online community for assistants around the world. And if you're looking for some serious career inspiration from some of the best and brightest executive assistants, you're in the right place. If we haven't met before, or if you're just joining us, I'm Jessica Gardner, founder of award-winning PAEA membership platform, The Assistant Room. Make sure you hit the follow button to keep up to date with all of our future episodes. But without further ado, welcome to Season 2 of the Assistant Room Podcast. In this episode, I chat to Ben Stevenson, Chief of Staff at Bloom Procurement, a supply chain company providing the public sector with a marketplace to buy and manage services. In this episode, Ben and I talk about his experience with crippling toxic perfectionism and the industry-wide impact this has on people on a daily basis, what imposter syndrome means to him, and the triggers he finds bring out his inner critic, his transition from EA to Chief of Staff at Bloom, and his advice for anyone else looking to follow a similar path, either in an existing or a new business. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited.
You.
We've done so many of these things before. Well, not podcasts, but we've done lots of roundtable discussions, and so it's nice to actually do something in person.
It is, yes. It makes a lovely change from being sat at home.
For 2 years.
For 2 years.
My God. Well, why don't we get started? We know each other very well.
Yep.
But why don't you tell everybody else the story of Ben Stevenson? So who are you? Where do you come from? What are you doing at the minute? What's the purpose of your role?
Cool, fab. Yep, so obviously we all know it's Ben Stevenson. So I'm from Cornwall originally, really kind of what I would class as a typical Cornish kind of background in terms of my career. Really started in kind of retail, not overly. I think the problem with Cornwall is there's not tons of opportunities to really kind of branch out unless you go looking for them. So you have to be very proactive in terms of what if there's any ambition that you want to fulfill. So yeah, left in 2013, moved into a kind of ops role within a pre-employment vetting screening company, and that was really, I guess, the first taste of kind of the PA support world, because it was a small family-run business, really kind of all-encompassing.
Yeah.
And that was kind of where I really got the kind of the thrill started to kick in of actually really kind of loving what I do now. And yeah, kind of a few things changed in my life, and then I thought, well, let's hop skip it to London, and as many people do, and found myself kind of in my first proper kind of dedicated PA office management role. Really great. I think if I could have wrote down on paper my dream job in London, it would have it ticked every single box in terms of office, people I worked with, what I was doing, the kind of scope and capacity I had. So yeah, it was really I kind of landed on my feet with that one, which was fantastic. And then kind of moved further up the country again, so I kind of followed a bit of a pattern here, up to Newcastle and joined Bloom, which is where I've been since 2019, and kind of haven't looked back, and I've loved it ever since then. So
nice.
Yeah, really, really fantastic company to work for. Joined them as EA to the founder, and I guess a similar kind of evolution of the role to UCheck in Exeter, which was I started doing a smaller role, but because of the size of the business and I guess the growth they were going through, and actually the speed that they were going through that growth, you were kind of able to wear lots of hats and do lots of different things. And I think about 12 months ago, that's when I was able to kind of scope out the Chief of Staff role and move into that, just because I was operating kind of above what I was expected to do at the time. And we went through our first round of investment, and really worked really closely then with our CEO, who was relatively new in post as well, and was in the process of bringing in her own management team. And it was a good time for us to kind of work together. And actually, we bounced off of each other really well, and we were quite a good. We complement each other really well as well, which is, I think, is really a key element of that kind of Chief of Staff role.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at today, which
Very
is
cool.
it's that's kind of putting it in a nutshell, but actually it's been a whirlwind over the last 4 years.
Yeah, we'd be here for absolutely ever if we were going to go towards details.
We'd be here for a very long time.
When you talk about the Chief of Staff role and how you kind of created that at Bloom, was that something that you put forward yourself, or was that something that they had discussions about and that kind of sparked your interest?
I think it was probably a bit of both, really. I think the CEO kind of identified the fact that actually I was doing a lot more than I was necessarily kind of need to do on paper. And then I was really keen to kind of just to develop and actually do more and kind of really establish myself within the business and actually forge a career path that was along the lines of what I was doing before, because I really love and kind of thrive on that cross-functional
Yeah.
element of the role. And I think we kind of just sat down and actually realised, we had to, you go through the process of putting like business cases together and it has to go to the board. So we went through all the kind of the boring kind of mundane sign-off process, but actually it was great to be able to identify an area for me to really kind of have an impact on the business. And even over the last 12 months of being in that role, it's kind of snowballed into me joining the executive team and actually becoming leader in my own right. And I've got kind of people joining into the kind of support element of the business under me in terms of leading that team. So it's been it's been a really good kind of
nice transition.
Yeah,
and kind of
really,
growth.
really nice transition.
Yeah. It must have been nice to work with a company as well who really value your opinion and input on what the business needs as well. I don't think many people necessarily have that experience working with a company.
No, I think you're right. And I think actually, and one of the things we talked about earlier in the week was around, it was a big learning curve for me and something that I needed to get over, actually building my confidence of actually having that voice. Because whilst, if I think back to, when we all kind of went at the beginning of the pandemic and we were all thrust into kind of working from home and actually being put out of my comfort zone and kind of actually having to do things I wasn't necessarily used to doing as part of my role and actually challenging leaders, really kind of stood me in good stead to actually then, create the kind of remit that I have now. And actually it's all about kind of, evolving a personal brand and establishing that. So
I love personal brand for PAs and EAs. And anyone in this industry, I think it's so important for so many reasons, not just for yourself, but also for the entire industry to represent ourselves in the right way. I love what you just said about challenging leaders. I think more people should feel confident to do that. But as you just said, you felt your confidence isn't always super high, but I think that takes a lot of guts.
I think actually feeding back to, because I remember it was a presentation someone had done, and I think actually having to give kind of, obviously constructive feedback, but actually giving feedback on someone's presentation style who, up until this point you were kind of not necessarily subordinate to, but you were obviously not, you're on a different level, and actually going into that. And I think it was good for me from a development perspective, but actually establishing that level playing field with someone and actually building up that rapport, because again, chief of staff role, a really massive part of that is the relationships you build and how you maintain and manage those, because it's so critical that you have to deal with all these types of stakeholders. So it wasn't really something you could shy away from. You kind of have to throw yourself into it, whether you like it or not. And I think actually that's, for anyone who is looking to go into that kind of role, that's one of the things you need to kind of either be comfortable with or get comfortable with quite quickly, because you're going to be doing it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. What's that mindset switch like? To go from a kind of role where technically you are subservient or you're putting somebody else first, which is the C-suite, and then you suddenly becoming, completely equal to that person because you have got an official place around the table as part of the executive leadership team. I think that a lot of PAs and EAs want to achieve that, but purely because of job title, it's not always something that's given. So how do you change that mindset? Because I think I would really struggle.
It is difficult. And I think actually when we talk about things like imposter syndrome and the toxic perfectionism, I think actually that's where it starts to creep in, because you need to, by putting yourself on that playing field, you're actually opening yourself up to quite a lot of vulnerabilities, because you go through the whole process of, this person knows more than I do, when actually they probably don't, but from as far as you're concerned, you know nothing and they know everything. And I guess as well, it's kind of, for me, opinions and views of others of me as a person really, really matter. And actually that's where a lot of my kind of confidence issues come from, because I don't want to do something that isn't right and right to a certain level, because I don't want someone to think, Ben's not good enough, or he's not done a great piece of work, or he's not being consistent. And I think that mindset for me is one thing. I think you've kind of, it's probably still there, but I think I've kind of, you go through and you learn different tactics to deal with it. And you have to, there's good days and bad days with it as well. And you have to just put yourself and kind of take a step back and remind yourself of where you are and the kind of journey you've been on, and the fact that actually you've earned the position you're in now. But be appreciative and just be nice, be kind to yourself about it, because you have to kind of, we all have to kind of evolve and do different things, and actually putting yourself into a different pair of shoes is part and parcel with it. But it's I think it's an ongoing it's an ongoing thing because you're always kind of going to develop and move into a different role, and it's always going to, if you went to a CEO role or a founder role. So it's I think it's a continual journey that you have to kind of go through.
Absolutely. Let's come back to the toxic perfectionism thing, because we did speak about this quite a lot earlier in the week, and we both admitted that we suffer from it in certain situations, not in everything, but in certain situations. So how would you define the kind of toxic perfectionism that you experience in your role, and how have you started to work through that?
Yeah, toxic perfectionism. I think I would probably, my kind of dubbing of that is kind of the pursuit of unhappiness, because you kind of go through that process of, I think, actually, I guess if I was to describe it in one word, in one way, it would kind of be, imagine having your foot on the accelerator of a car, but also on the brake, because you're trying to kind of go 50 million miles an hour, do all these things that you need to get done, but actually you're not really kind of doing anything because you get hit by procrastination. You get hit by, again, for me, like worrying about what other people are going to view of the work you're doing. I think actually some of the main triggers for me are around, which are mad as well, because things like reward and recognition. I think that, if I've done a really good job and I've earned my bonus, for example, in a quarter or a half year, you get that and you think, oh God, because it's an additional pressure and it's a different additional reward, and you're getting your money. You need to kind of, you have this additional pressure on yourself to feel as though you have to kind of continually keep that level of of performance, which is understandable, I know, but it's a strange kind of setup. The more you progress and the better you do with things, the more it kind of, the more you feel that kind of toxic kind of perfectionism and the need to be perfect all the time.
It's weird, isn't it? Because you would think that the more experience that you've got in something and the more you are practicing something, you would expect to be more confident with it.
Yeah.
But it's not the case. I mean, when we were chatting the other day, I think I mentioned about how as a company we can have a huge win and we can go through lots of amazing things, get lots of people sign up to the membership, place an amazing person in a role working for a CEO. One tiny thing will happen, and that's what I will focus on.
Yeah. And I'm exactly the same, because I mean, I think that's another thing for me. Mistakes, even if it's a little mistake. And I think one of the things I probably suffer with as well is kind of like a low level hum of anxiety, just kind of throughout my day.
I think we all do, don't we?
Oh God, yeah.
To some extent.
Massively. And I think actually, but then you get, the best way I can kind of look at it is, if I make a mistake, I catastrophize, and I go to a place where you think even like the littlest thing could result in you losing your job, or you being demoted, or someone getting ahead instead of you. But actually, it's completely crazy when you actually kind of take a step back. But when you're in that moment, it's really difficult to kind of split those kind of two thought processes and actually think, well, actually it's not the end of the world. You can learn from that mistake, and I think that's one of the key things you have to remember. But then equally, it's you need to just kind of, again, practice that kind of self-compassion, and remember that actually it's not gonna cause,
you're not gonna get
a massive catastrophe. You're not gonna get the sack. So that's kind of where I kind of bounce around a lot, and actually thinking, oh my God, what have I done wrong? It's the end of the world, and actually it isn't. And you have to really kind of be kind to yourself and try not to go down that road.
I think that's why a lot of people find it difficult to admit that they've done something wrong as well, isn't it? It's accountability. And I think with a lot of CEOs or directors, they want to see that you're able to hold yourself accountable and kind of throw your hands up in the air. But then again, there's that other side of being a PA or an EA or anyone in the business support profession, which is about being solution driven. And so acknowledging that something goes wrong is probably the easiest and best way that you can start to find a solution as well. And if you sit there panicking, how are you meant to overcome it?
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing, when you can get stung by a lot of things, like when you're trying to be perfect, you can get stuck a lot with things like procrastination, because if you're looking at a big task or a project and you think, I want to be able to do this right, but if you have even an inkling of the fact that you might not do it to a level you're happy with, that kind of fear state sets in, you become frozen, and then you put it off. And I do it quite a lot, but I mean, my way of overcoming it now is I kind of do the 5-minute rule, and I make myself work on something for 5 minutes if it's a big task to kick it off, because after 5 minutes, that kind of fear subsides and you're in your flow, you can kind of crack on with it. But I think if it's something new as well that's not in your comfort zone, which I've got to do quite a lot with my role now, just trying to kickstart that, and you think, God, if I don't do this right or well, what is my boss going to think of me, or what is this other leader going to think of me? So it's really it can be quite really crippling, and that's that's what's always been a challenge.
But also quite exciting. If you're doing all of these new things, building your skill set, developing new relationships with new people. I mean, what are the key differences between, in your experience, chief of staff and executive assistant?
I think the first one is you need to, as early as you can, move away from the kind of traditional day-to-day support, because I think actually is one of the things I've kind of done more recently. Actually, you can't do both elements of the role. And you might be really lucky and you might be in a business or join a business that has a kind of clearly defined standalone chief of staff role, which you can kind of walk into, and you haven't got the kind of historic hangover of what you used to do before in terms of an EA role. But I think for me, actually trying to establish those boundaries and set out a clear parameter of, okay, well, this is what you're here to do. Make sure you've got the backing of the person that you're kind of, you're working with, and setting out the remit of that role. But I think one of the things I've had to do really quite quickly was to just build, again, it comes back to building a brand, because you have to, and changing that mindset, because you have to kind of transform yourself into this different person, because otherwise you'll kind of constantly be called upon for other things, and you'll get easily sucked back into the ways of working that you were doing before.
From other people around you,
from
and
other people, because they just
expectations.
they think, well, actually, no, Ben used to do that, so it's fine. I can just he'll do it, and they'll know. And again, this comes back to not wanting to, annoy anyone. So you kind of think, oh, I'll do that because it's a quick win, and they'll think, that I'm really helpful and lovely, and they'll get on and do that for them. But no, I think one of the I think the chief of staff role for me, it's really about it's being that kind of that bridge between the kind of strategic goals of the business and actually making those strategic goals into more of like an objective reality, and it's actually doing whatever it takes to achieve that.
Yeah.
Because we all know that a chief of staff is kind of like a jack of all trades, and that's why it is such a good transition from an EA role. But you have to really go out and be really proactive around the opportunities and finding the projects, and building up the skill set that you don't necessarily that you might not have yet, and kind of getting as much experience from around the business that you wouldn't ordinarily get from a day to day.
And I imagine that takes a considerable amount of time. I mean, I think that obviously we advocate for pushing the industry forward as much as possible and supporting people and kind of climbing up the ladder, a ladder that a lot of time doesn't exist for some people. Everyone has to make their own ladder, especially in this industry. But I think I have really noticed that strategy and strategic is a buzzword for a lot of assistants trying to prove themselves to bosses who maybe don't appreciate what that actually means. And I think a lot of people actually don't understand what being a strategic assistant actually is. And it's not something that just comes very easily, and it's a completely different skill set. And that doesn't mean that you can't get there, but it means that you have to understand what that actually means to make a big difference and to become strategic. Because it is completely different, isn't it? You've stepped into this chief of staff role. That's when the kind of strategy piece really kicks up a notch.
Yeah, and I guess it's understanding what does strategy mean, because if you look at it from a point of actually being strategic as an assistant is making sure that your boss has got everything they need in order to succeed in their role, and making sure that I think when you look at it from a strategic perspective of a chief of staff, you're taking responsibility and ownership for either a piece of the strategy or a value creation strategy, and you're actually owning that and seeing that through as a piece of work or a project, and actually having because you take on the accountability of the delivery, the formulation, the KPIs. So it's almost like I would say it's a different view of strategy that some assistants probably would have, because I think there's being strategic from a point of view of making the person's in the right place, or they've the travel's arranged and meticulously and in the best way possible. But it's a weird one, because there's two different sides of the coin, and actually I think it comes down to changing the mindset and the understanding of what it means to be strategic from one role to the other, which I think is happening. And I think there's a lot more that we can kind of do in terms of helping EAs who want to go down that kind of career path to get there and to transition from that. Absolutely.
Okay, so if we were to think about, I'm an EA, I've come to you and I've said, what do I need to do to get to be a chief of staff? What are the areas that you think people need to start concentrating on? Is it networking with the right people? Is it being present in certain meetings? Is it learning a new skill set? Is it, being really honest with your boss and saying, this is what I want to do, without being afraid of them thinking, oh, they don't want to be my PA anymore. Because I think that's a big problem in itself as well. People or executives not wanting their PAs or EAs to be too ambitious.
Yeah, there's definitely that. I think there's not wanting to be too ambitious. They don't want to, and if you're a fantastic assistant and your boss loves you, I think there's the element of they don't really want to let you go. So it's a bit of like, I think there's almost probably an internal battle with a lot of leaders. They think, I really want to let this person get on, but equally, I don't want to kind of lose them because I'm used to them and they do everything I need them to do and they perform really well. But I think the biggest thing for me is, yes, networking is fantastic because you need to kind of start moving yourself in different circles. I mean, it's great to kind of, have a kind of a foothold in both camps. Even after you transition into the role, because you can offer quite a lot to other people coming up the ladder as well. But for me, one of the most valuable things has always been having a mentor outside of the business or outside of what you're doing now in terms of the industry, who is already in that role but has gone through a similar kind of process to you. That's been, for me, that's been really invaluable. When I've had mentors, so for the last kind of 2 or 3 years, and they've ranged from kind of more senior EAs or EVPs up and now into a chief of staff role, because you need someone who can challenge you but equally can relate. And I think that's really important. So I think if you're looking to do that and you want to do that, that's where I would start. Absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. What's it been like going from EA to chief of staff from an emotional perspective? Because I know we touched on imposter syndrome, we've touched on confidence. Have there been any moments where you've really seriously doubted yourself and thought, is this really for me?
I think I have, and I think it's probably a combination of everything. And I think actually one of the biggest things, working from home, I'm a massive advocate of working from home. I think it's massively here to stay. You shouldn't go anywhere. And I think actually that we're probably in a better position for it. That said, I think you need to be really mindful and, again, proactive of how you're dealing with your kind of working pattern and work-life balance, because you can really easily be sucked into this kind of solitude kind of mindset. And actually, if you're not connecting with people, you're not having the visibility and people don't know who you are, and you're not having those regular touch points, it's really easy to start losing track of actually what you're doing, the impact you're having. So for me, our office is in Gateshead, I'm in South Wales. This is a good 4 or 5 hours in terms of driving. So I'm not in the office as often as probably as often as I would like, actually. But when I go there, it's really a fantastic opportunity because you meet people and you can start to kind of come back into the fold a little bit. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for me. It's actually managing that. It is autonomous in terms of the role, but managing that to an extent of you're not losing track of what's important, and actually keeping your kind of mental health and well-being at the forefront of that, because I think you can just easily it can easily kind of play into more of a detriment. Everyone likes a flexible life, but I think actually, as long as if you're not doing it right, then it becomes more of a hindrance than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And you lose that personal touch, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think with this role, you need to kind of, it's transitioning into a new role. It's really key that you've got the buy-in from other people, and you're able to, like I said, you're able to establish yourself.
Yeah. Talking about buy-in from other people, let's go back to you building your own team.
Yes.
I'm so excited for you.
Yeah.
What's that process been like so far?
It's been really good, actually. We brought in a PA and office coordinator towards the end of last year. So Lindsay's fantastic. She's kind of working with our chief operating officer and our chief development officer. And I think we've gone from, we used to have kind of two EAs within the business, and for a long time it was just me. And actually being able to kind of build that function out now and actually have, again, it becomes a brand in itself, because you want to be able to be the best that you can be within that perspective. I think one of the challenges, coming back to the kind of perfectionist element, is it's really easy to start being really outward and actually kind of projecting your own view of kind of what it should be onto someone else. And you have to be really, really mindful. And again, it comes back to the compassion piece, when you have to kind of cut people some slack and not hold other people to the same level as you. And I don't mean that in the sense of, I'm not in no way saying I'm kind of performing above anyone else, but it's what I expect of myself. It's not fair to then put that onto someone else, especially, if they're new to the business, or because it's...
Yeah, everyone does things differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Progression in general, obviously EA, chief of staff, now manager of admin team. How have you adapted to that? Because I think the idea of management, not everybody is good at being a manager,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes a lot of experience to be a good manager, and you only learn as you go through it. So have you got any advice for anybody who may be developing their own team internally?
Yeah, I think my biggest learning curve is probably avoid working in the silo that you're probably used to, especially I think if you're either an EA or you're a leader within a business and you're kind of responsible for one element and you're the only person within that team. It's really difficult to kind of let go and to delegate and actually to give people the opportunity and the chance to, show them what you can do, or show you what they can do, and just have the opportunity and the set up and the tools to do an amazing job. I think that's been the biggest challenge for
Avoid
me.
being a micromanager.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's avoid being a micromanager, because otherwise you can kind of you'll scare people off. And I would never want anyone to think, I can't work with Ben because he doesn't, he micromanages and he doesn't let go of anything. But I think I think that's probably one of the biggest things, like I say, is just do your best to kind of not micromanage, especially if you're used to kind of working quite autonomously and you find it hard. If you find it hard to let go, I think you have to kind of just practice that a little bit more and become comfortable with it.
Absolutely. Do you think your experience as an EA as well is going to enable you to provide maybe experiences for them that you didn't have access to as well? So, learning and development is a huge thing for PAs and EAs, or pretty much everybody needs learning and development, but it is hugely lacking for our industry.
Mm-hmm.
And giving them a voice and visibility in areas that maybe they typically wouldn't if they were managed by somebody who hadn't been an EA before.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of my kind of my development and involvement within the industry and the network, obviously with yourself, has been really kind of self-driven, and I've had to be really proactive about it. And actually, I'm continually speaking to our team around the kind of events you can get involved in, the networking side, the benefits of that, actually advocating the training. And it is, I think it's far more at the forefront of everyone's mind now, because I'm able to kind of pass that torch on and actually, champion all these things. And, and I think a lot of people don't, it depends what industry and what kind of role they've come from, because I think you can have a PA who doesn't necessarily interact very much with the industry and doesn't actually see or doesn't know or understand the benefit of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I think you can come from, especially if you're in a bigger team where you've got 3 or 4 other PAs, and that's the kind of the role you're used to. But actually, there's so many resources and there's so much advice and guidance and support outside of, and I think it is good to branch outside of your business as well, because you get all these different perspectives, even if you're, if you're in like a WhatsApp group with other people, and it's just having that network where if you want to have a rant about something, or you want to, you're finding advice.
Tough
for like
day, have a glass of wine or a gin and
exactly.
tonic with someone who just gets it.
Definitely. I think you need that.
Yeah, I learnt more when I was a PA, actually sitting down at a networking event and talking to somebody about what they would do in my situation, as opposed to watching a class or a lesson on LinkedIn. I just think having that real world experience can solve so many more problems than having, a book to read, or going and listening to someone talk in a theatre full of 500 other people, because it's that personal element. And that's what our roles are, really, isn't it? It's a personal relationship with our boss that we have. And unfortunately, it doesn't always go 100% right. But again, going back to that toxic perfectionism as well, we have to understand that not everything is going to be right all the time.
No. And I think you just need to just give yourself the opportunity to step back and just, whether mindfulness might be your thing, or meditation, whatever it is that gives yourself the headspace to actually think, what, I've done a fantastic job, and really just take the opportunity to reflect on your successes and reflect on your achievements. Because, if you sit down at the end of the day or the end of the month and you just list out all the positive things, all the things that have gone well, and equally, if you're getting positive feedback or fantastic feedback and you've made a couple of little kind of minor mistakes, what is that in the grand scheme of things? But I think equally as well, I think if you are kind of, struggling, or if you're kind of suffering from a toxic perfectionism kind of mindset, I think the one thing to bear in mind, I would say from my own experience, is you can have a conversation with someone about it, and that will make you feel better. But sometimes it's only a bit of a sticking plaster. So I think actually you need to kind of go out of your way to really kind of address and acknowledge the issue, and actually start to look at what things you can then do that fit in with your own personality and your kind of fit in well with who you are, but actually start to deal with that. And because no one wants to be in that mindset, and it's not a nice place to be. And sadly it kind of has far more kind of far-reaching effects than hopefully you and I have kind of experienced and gone through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the idea of giving somebody else feedback as well as receiving feedback is something that most business support professionals or administrative professionals just are too afraid to do or don't know how to do it.
Yep.
Have you found that going from EA to chief of staff, you've had to adapt to giving feedback more often to senior leaders in a different way?
Yeah, and I think actually I've become, sometimes I think I've probably become a little bit too direct with some of, because I think again, going back to my boss, we've got a fantastic relationship and we're really quite we're quite open, and again we are quite direct with each other, but it's always in a constructive in a friendly way. But I think sometimes you can kind of, for me actually now it's easier to give feedback to people within the exec team or the board than it is to kind of give feedback to other colleagues, because I don't know, it's just the relationship you have with them now. It's really strange, yeah, especially with Amabel, our CEO. She's again, obviously she's my boss, so it's far easier. I can be really, really honest with her, and kind of it's almost like actually you're now your true self with someone, and it's kind of switched from being where you were previously perhaps your true self with your colleague or other people in your kind of your PA or EA team. It's like that's been a massive switch to actually now being like that with the C-level team.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's weird. It's really strange.
Well, it's just, I suppose it's just the natural transition of the role, really, isn't it? And the fact that you have that relationship with her is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, cool. Let's wrap this up.
Okay.
And let's go back to your very first day in a business support role.
God, a long time ago.
If you could look at everything you've achieved so far, all the challenges that you've gone through, all of the things that you've overcome, all of the experiences that you've had that have got you to where you are now, what advice would you give to yourself on the very first day that you were in this industry?
I think there'll be two things. One would be trust your gut, because I think for me actually that's one thing I've always gone with, and even in any kind of situation, whether it's a job move or like a personal situation or just any kind of big decision, so if it's not felt right, don't do it. Or if it has felt right, just go for it, regardless. And I think you have to then block out what other people are saying, and you have to do what you want to do for you. And then I think on the other side of that, it's just believe in yourself. I think that's the biggest thing, because that covers off so much. It covers off, if you've got confidence issues, or if you you do suffer from imposter syndrome, it's actually, know your worth, believe in yourself, and just be kind to yourself, because ultimately, you're there to kind of look after yourself and
everyone else. And if you can't do it for yourself, then how can you do it for everyone else?
True.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben.
No problem.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram to keep up to date with all of our future episodes. And if you're looking for a place to focus on your personal and professional development, we have a place in the Assistant Room membership with your name on it. Head to our website for more information on how to sign up and become part of our award-winning online global community for assistants everywhere.